Hi, I'm Jim. Welcome to the Unbound Performance Podcast, where we explore the world of sports and performance mindset training.
And I'm Caroline. Each week we talk about the strategies, habits, and mental framework that help us to excel. Let's get into today's episode. Now that I'm out of breath again.
Yeah, we'll let you gather yourself.
Be all right.
It's interesting because some of the stuff
Guess we're recording.
All right, I guess here we go. Yeah, recently Michael Gervais had Alex Honnold on his podcast, Finding Mastery, and Honnold is a famous rock climber, like beyond comprehension almost.
Not your average.
So he's the first and only person to date to climb like from base to summit El Capitan in Yosemite, which is almost 3,000 feet.
With
sheer.
No harness,
Yeah,
just
nothing.
climbing. Nothing.
No ropes. No support system. And the documentary Free Solo about that is harrowing to watch. It won an Academy Award.
First time I watched it, I was like, I don't know if I can watch this any longer. Like, I was just... Which I'll get to actually that feeling in a moment, but go ahead.
Well, the New York Times called that feat one of the great athletic feats of all time, which it is unequivocal.
Yeah.
No doubt. So while I have absolutely zero interest in doing anything like that.
Not a chance. Or witnessing it live.
Yeah. And that was, when they're filming this, he has people filming it. And
like his close friends who might watch him die.
Yeah. They're literally saying I could be filming
his death.
My friend.
Yeah.
So it was really good. I highly recommend it. And he makes this crack in the podcast, because he goes around, he does a lot of public speaking, and people come up to him all the time. I could never do that. I'm afraid of heights. And he says, well, really, most people aren't. It's not the heights they're afraid of. It's falling to their death.
Yeah.
They're afraid,
yeah.
Which is like very true. And when you're way up there, it's like death is guaranteed. I
was reading something about they just did a Google search of him, just hot points. And it was saying how, like, he doesn't do this because he's an adrenaline seeker. Like,
right.
He does it because he has learned how to master his feelings. And, like, he's like, that was the feeling of, like, we watched that and we're like, oh my God, like, he's so high up. He's not, like, there's nothing catching him. Like, but he doesn't do it because he gets up there and he has this thrill-seeking adrenaline rush. It's actually the exact opposite, where he is so good at managing his stress and eliminating all of those fear factors that your average person would have, and cause them to fail or slip or not have a backup plan or just be purely afraid to do it, which frankly I am. But it's
definitely.
I think most people would look at him and be like, oh, he must be an adrenaline junkie. But I don't believe he describes himself as such, nor does anybody else who's really like studied him. They realize that it's not about...
He does say like that's when he feels most alive.
Correct.
Or something like that.
But it's not like this heart racing adrenaline, like I want to jump out of a plane type of feeling.
Yeah. And he started climbing when he was like 10. And so he's like 40. And it's a good long while to be climbing. So studies were done on people's brain activity when they are afraid, and most people they were shown pictures of disturbing images or disturbing sounds, and
it's like the size of the amygdala kind of or something. Yeah.
And then when they did it with him, it's like nothing was happening. And so at first they tried to explain it as, well, he just has a different kind of brain. But really it's because he's trained, like he's been in these, really
literal life or death
defying situations, to the point that just seeing pictures or hearing unpleasant music.
Does nothing to him.
Have the impact it would on us. And so that's, people who do things like that, I just find interesting. So I read his book, Alone on the Wall, which is really good. Has some really cool color pictures in it too.
A picture book.
That's right. But I mean, now he's married with a couple of young children.
Is he married to the girl from the?
Yep.
I think at the end of that, we weren't totally sure where that was going.
Well, and that was, he talks about the stress it put on them.
Yeah.
Because they filmed this. Took a couple of years to film it. And yeah, for sure you didn't really know.
Yeah.
But engaging in behavior that, fairly routinely you could plunge to your death while doing, when you've got,
Mm-hmm.
wife and children. I know for me, it would give me a pause.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly I am not wired like he is, or haven't trained my brain the way he does, which says leaves plenty of other time to do other things. But the ability to make a climb like that for hours and
maintain that.
Yes. Like,
it's not just, it didn't take him 15 minutes.
No. So then you're like, you really have to lock in and be present. Your attention and focus. And there are parts of that wall that are easier.
Sure.
So
it's not pure treachery the entire way. However, you may have an easier part and then a treacherous part and another easy one, which you have to get through.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was the part for me watching it, was like, okay, he got past that. And then I don't know, maybe I'm making this up or they were worried about it, but like weather coming through, like the things that you can't really predict. Like you can look at the weather forecast and this and that, but the reality is what happens when you're up there, and having to have a backup plan for every little thing is another part of like having all of that in the back of your mind of what's next and how to pivot. I think makes it that much more challenging just to do that from the very beginning, but also be able to know that you've got plan B, C, D, E, and F, hopefully, before you hit death. Like, that's hard.
That's, one, that you practice improving focus and ability to hold attention by doing all of this stuff. Two, like he talked about a recent climb where he had actually gotten past the hard part. Weather came in and he had dropped his phone. So there was like, he didn't have a choice. He had to go back. Yeah. And that's where being an adrenaline junkie could prove problematic. If you're just like,
gonna go anyway.
Screw it, I'm going. Yeah. Like, so he makes, a really rational decision. Now he wasn't robotic about it. He was like annoyed and said he drove an electric car there and there was no one else around. And of course his phone is destroyed, which was the key to the car. But somehow whatever was still alive let him get in the car and start the car in the phone. But he talked about the aggravation of having to spend how many hours getting a new phone and all of that. And so he's not much different from us in a lot of ways, other than
the ability to lock in.
Yeah, he has trained himself. One, he loves doing this, which I don't. But he's trained himself over time to be able to be right there and not be distracted. And, we talk about that kind of training and presence pretty routinely. I always reference the Miyamoto Musashi, where he would just train readiness, not the particular strokes, the ability to have this unwavering focus, for a long period of time. And that's very similar to this. Like he practices that by climbing.
Yeah.
And
well, I think that ability to not let in those intrusive thoughts, whatever you want to call them, like for better or for worse, he probably can't think about his kids when he's on those walls, or his wife, or what if I like, he can't even go there, or else that bodily response kicks in. And I think that's one of those abilities to like, it's one thing if someone's uncomfortable with public speaking, and you can practice that a few times, but it's not public speaking or death, right? It's a whole different, like, maybe you're a little sweaty, or you stumble over your words, whatever that response or that reaction is to that fear that you have. But this is one of those where it's not just he's practicing. There are so many other things that you have to be able to, like you said, be present, and so present that you don't even go to that place of fear. Like, this is a little bit unrelated, but you see the article about that girl that fell off the Disney cruise ship and her dad had to jump in and save her?
Oh yeah, sure did.
That's my worst fear. We've gone on 2 cruises, one with one kid and one with when we had both kids. And both times, like a week or two before, I had been on a cruise before. I had these irrational thoughts that either the kid was going to jump overboard and one of us was going to jump in to get him or her, and it was going to be nighttime, and then we'd both be gone, or whoever, both. Right? Like, thank God that was a daytime event. And then I saw that article, and I'm watching it, and I sent it to my husband. I was like, this is my worst, because he actually, when I finally said to him out loud that I was having those sort of like intrusive thoughts leading up to the trip, he was like, do you want to know the thoughts I've had? And I was like, what? And he was like, I've had the thought of like, what if I throw the kid overboard? And he was like, not because I think I would, but he was like, going to that like horrible place of, like, he was like, I'm horrified to say this to you, because I would clearly not choose to throw my kid overboard, but like that's where your brain goes, that like worst horrible, like when we're asleep and our brain goes to terrible places. Yep, like
we all do that.
And when he said that to me, I was like, what? And he was like, I'm not saying I want to throw the kid overboard or I would ever even hurt my kid at all. He was like, but that's where I'm going, and that like as far down that road as possible. And I think that's one of those things where, like I said, in public speaking or in any uncomfortable situation, whether it be sports or like, you cannot let those thoughts enter, or else that would have ruined our entire trip. Right? Like, I can't sit there the entire time like, well, hope no one jumps off the side of the balcony or else it's ruined. I mean, I was cognizant and watching my kids at all times, but the reality was the likelihood of that happening was very low.
Very.
But you have to be able to separate those like aggressively intrusive thoughts that you know are irrational, the ones that are like a maybe scenario, and the ones that are just not going to happen. And I definitely, in this case of free soloing, if he's thinking like, my friends are all videoing me, what if I fall to my death and now my kids have this on video? Well, that's not good for your mental state during that, right? Like, you cannot go there.
No, and that's where some of this is applicable in a performance setting, because usually what really gets us in trouble, in a game or whatever, is us not being right here.
Yeah.
And worrying about, what if I miss this serve, or, then we lose and I let everybody down, and it's like the odds of you missing the serve go way up.
Yep.
And that's how you're feeling. Or still lamenting whatever poor play you made on the last point. All of it gets in the way of you being good right now.
It does nothing for positive forward progress.
Zero. So in his situation, which is why it's so utterly fascinating, that the ramifications of a misstep or a lack of focus or whatever, being distracted, are, death. That's to me, it just goes to show what is possible. And he's climbed a long time, so he feels very confident. He talks about, like, I don't think I'm going to fall to my death. Well, guess what? If he did, bam, don't do it. Like, that's.
Well, I haven't read the book, but just as an outsider watching that Free Solo documentary, I don't feel like maybe that movie did the justice of like us, what we're talking about, as far as like he has trained himself to do these things. I think that was more of like for a thematic kind of experience of it being, you'd like
very
watching
dramatic,
it like on your right. Yeah. Because if you just watch it, you're like, this guy is a kook. He's eating macaroni and cheese out of his van with a spatula out of a pot. Like he's a little bit nutty. I remember being like, this guy's a nut. However,
you went to Cal Berkeley.
Not an idiot, I guess.
No.
But you watch it and you're like, okay, this guy is just not your average person. And he's not, but he wasn't born, he may have been born a little different, like he wasn't born a rock climber, right? But as far as his upbringing and the nurture versus nature type of stuff. So I think in that documentary, if you just watch it, you're like, all right, this guy is clearly not so. Maybe he's very intelligent. However, you're watching this and you're like, this guy is just. But when you really think about that's not something that's just in his blood because he was just born that way. That is something that was practiced over his entire lifetime.
He's talked about it. Like when he was young, he wasn't all that great at it. And even when he was a teenager and started winning some awards or placing high, he says that a lot of it's because the guys who were better than me were competing with adults.
Yeah.
They stopped competing in the right age group. And so he's definitely, it puts definitely the lie to the idea that you're born great or that kind of fixed mindset deal where no, he just
you either got it or you don't.
He loved it, did it a lot, studied it, and it is interesting. He does talk about visualizing in that podcast. Gervais asked him, like, do you visualize the whole thing? He said the whole thing is too immense, like the El Capitan thing. It's too huge, and I don't need to visualize all of it.
Yeah,
because
like some of it's not. Yeah, it's challenging.
But he said the more challenging parts definitely saw myself doing it over and over and over. Which there's another lesson to be learned in terms of performance. Everybody who's really good, they do all that, and
not to be undermined.
No. So it's a very interesting episode. If you don't want to listen to the whole podcast, I recommend listening to the whole thing. It's really good. The Free Solo documentary is, I would say that is must viewing. It's beautiful. I mean, the scenery is beautiful,
great,
and it's dramatic.
It's very well done.
Yeah. So I think from a friend of mine asked me, I posted something about it some time ago, and he was like, what's the point of doing things like that? And I didn't even want to have the discussion, but this constant showing what we're capable of and no limits and going for it. And then how do you do that? Yeah. What processes are in place that allow you to go from a 10-year-old, like no big deal climber to someone who's done something that no one has ever done before. And
I think you have that growth. Like I was talking with my mom day before or yesterday or something, and she was saying how I always have something new and shiny that I'm looking for, whether it's a new house project, or I want to buy a new house, or I want to get a new car, or try something new, or start a business. And I don't think that it's me trying to find something new and shiny because I need new shiny things all the time. I just am the type that, like, I can't just sit in my completedness. There's always something more to be done. And whether that requires me to make something up to do, or there's something that's already out there that I can tackle, like, I'm just the type of person that always has to be tackling something. Like, if I don't have some bit of chaos going on in my world, and chaos is probably the wrong word. I think the outside looking in, people view it as chaos. But for me, it's like, it's fun. It's a game. Energy. It's a challenge. That's where my energy comes from. And so while there are certainly days when I'm just like, oh my God, like, I cannot take any more. Because everyone's like, you're starting a business and you're selling your house and you're having another business and the podcast. Like, people are just like, and the reality is you don't do it all. Right. My house is clean right now because we're selling it, but my house is not clean all the time. My laundry's not always done. I'm not doing it all. But I do have to have those things that I am continuously chasing in order to have some task or goal that is challenging to me. And that's where I find energy, and I thrive in that. So I don't view it as like, oh, you always have something stressful going on. If I'm not managing stressful things, then, like, what am I doing?
Yeah, and the idea that stress is always bad is not true.
Well, I think people, on the outside looking in, people would think, like, I would be stressed if I were you. And don't get me wrong, I'm certainly stressed some days. But I don't view, like, I'm not losing my mind stressed. I'm just like, okay, like, what's it today? What am I going to have to organize? What challenge? What's my calendar look like? What am I scheduling? But I do well in that environment.
Yeah, and I think that all of this kind of thing, it's how you can push the envelope a bit. And whether your envelope involves rock climbing or, something like this where you just are going forward on, multiple prongs.
Yep. It's rewarding. Makes me tougher and stronger every time I do one more thing, and that's enjoyable for me.
Nice. I dig it.
Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Unbound Performance Podcast.
Your support helps us continue to build our community. If you're enjoying this content, please like, subscribe, and share.